Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
Welcome to this week's episode of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. I am Mike, your host, human solutions consultant here in Seattle, Washington. This week, we're going to be talking a little bit about change. Everybody loves change. I know as soon as I said that, some of you probably slapped your head. We all hate change. Human beings just don't do well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and the resistance to it. And then we are going to talk a little bit about how anxiety affects facial recognition. And an interesting study that showed that if you're an introvert, you might have trouble recognizing faces. And then we're going to talk about our question of the day, which is, why do we dream? So stay tuned. We'll be right back with our main segment. Thanks. The funny thing about life is that one of the only things that's constant is change, and yet humans resist it with all their being. Sometimes it's an interesting paradox, the way we fight change. And this past year is notwithstanding. This past year, we have seen a lot of change, and we have seen a lot of strange behaviors related to that change. Why is it, though, that we hate it so much? Which is it's an interesting paradox to our daily lives. So why is that? Well, we often talk about the fear of the unknown, and that's one of the reasons that change represents to us, is that it's an unknown, so we automatically fear it. And anytime we fear something, we activate the limbic system of our brain, and we start into survival mode. Now, from I guess you can say an energy construct, a survival mechanism of the brain is that it wants to conserve as much energy as it's possible to do so. Why do we do this? Well, if you think about it, let's take ourselves out of the human person and put it into, let's say, a lion, right? Because I think most of us have probably seen a show about lions, and they spend a lot of time just sort of chilling out, not doing a whole much until they have to hunt. Then they go out and they have these tremendous bursts of energy. They hunt, they kill, they eat, and then they go back to doing not a lot. Okay, that is the essential function of that survival mechanism. So we conserve energy in order to have that energy available for survival needs. And so this is kind of an interesting play, right? Because when change happens, it creates a situation which forces our brains to start eating up energy, and it doesn't want to do this. So how does that translate? Well, it translates into resistance to change. So in effect, we are engaging our survival mechanisms, and then we are trying not to engage them. We're basically engaging our survival mechanism and then trying not to let our survival mechanism work. If you think about it for a sec, because the brain doesn't want to burn that energy. Now, for those of you who may not know, the activity in the brain eats up 1/5 of your caloric intake. So 20% of your calories burned per day is burned by your brain by itself, right? And that's just being at rest. And then anytime we need to utilize that circuitry, that brain, we burn more calories. Now, it probably, I don't know the science behind this, and I don't know the health behind this, so I don't know if it burns like up to 25% or up to 30%. But basically, the more thinking you do, the more energy you burn. And because the design mechanism is to not burn the energy, we have the resistance. So we have these twofold things going on. We're engaging the limbic system, and our survival mechanisms kick in, and then we start resisting the problem. Now, in our modern society, one of the reasons why this is such a problem for us is that we are engaging our limbic system artificially. So, because we haven't changed that much in our evolution, and I know that may offend some people, but that's what we're going to talk about today, is we in all the many years that humans have been on Earth, we haven't changed that much. It seems like it because we have developed language and we've developed these very modern ideas and technology and things, but really our physical systems that are in place are still the same as they were on the in the savannas of Africa and way back when. So we have changed a lot around those, but those are still our basic drives. So anytime that we engage that limbic system, we start burning calories and we start burning energy, and then our brain wants to shut it down. So we resist those changes. Now, I guess the argument then becomes, well, do we resist the change or do we go with the flow? Because there's arguments for both, right? There's the argument that if you go with the flow, you're going to ease into that change. You're going to adapt, and you're going to conserve energy. So that's that survival mechanism justification for going with the flow, so to speak. Now, the other one is the resistance to, and that's that fight, flight, freeze system. But it really just comes down to context, and this is where your personality and your ideals and values and beliefs start to engage. Now, again, this becomes super complex because of the very complex systems that are driving these behaviors. So when we are out there and change happens, and the whole COVID situation is a really great example of how change has forced us to adapt to the situation, and what those adaptations have come out to be. Some people are still resisting the change. Some people are going with the flow, and we can see that people adapt differently to these external stimulus. I don't know if that's really all that interesting, because we all face changes every day. We have to adapt, which is the interesting and unique property of human development. And the adaptation to change is what creates our growth. See how this becomes a paradox, is that if we simply rely on our base processes, the operating system, if you will, we don't grow. That's where we get these terms like laziness, or you can argue efficiency, right? Because what's efficiency? We're trying to do things quicker, faster. Sometimes that means shortcutting, whatever. But we tend to look at these ideas as sort of if you just go with the flow, you're kind of lazy. And again, these are value-based judgments. So what do? Well, I don't have an answer for you because that's not my job. My job is just sort of to extend to you this idea of why we're doing these things. It's really up to you to decide what you're going to do, because when I'm faced with some changes, I can choose to go with the flow, or I can choose to resist. And part of me is going to resist anyway because of those deep-seated values or beliefs or whatever it is. And simply making this choice to go with the flow doesn't always work out the way we would like it to. But there are certain things that I'm okay with change happening. And then there are things that I'm not okay with change happening. And when I'm not okay with it, that it revs up my internal systems more, and I create stress. And when I create stress, that's my survival mechanisms kicking in. So, as we all change every day or are forced to think about these things, I think it's probably a good idea to really engage yourself as to what benefits the change brings and what benefits the change don't bring. If resisting the change brings benefits, resist. If not, go with the flow. See, this becomes uh, uh, this is how it becomes an exercise in choice. Is how do we decide what to do with things? And that is sort of the process. Those are two, I think, probably two of the main points of when we are given change in our lives. Is that there's a big fear of the unknown, which is one of the reasons why we resist so much. And then the second is the biomechanical part of energy expenditures. So let me know what you think about that. I'm always interested to hear your thoughts. We'll be right back with some interesting studies about introversion and extroversion and facial recognition, as well as anxiety. So we'll be right back. We're back, and I found this really interesting research about facial recognition. Because I study faces and things like that, I found a really interesting study that suggested that if you're introverted, you may have a more difficult time recognizing faces. And that's a very interesting idea. So our facial recognition occurs in the brain in the temporal lobe, and it's called the fusiform facial area. And it's part of the fusiform gyrus, which is on the back sides of your temporal lobe on either hemisphere. And that's where we process, or that's where we think facial recognition is processed. Now, the interesting thing is that we know that anxiety can create problems with memory. And as it turns out, it creates problems with facial recognition, meaning that it's very difficult to remember new faces that you've seen if you are in an anxious state. But what this study did was it took it in a different direction and found that extroverts tended to score higher on facial recognition than introverts. And that was kind of an interesting thing based on this study and we don't know exactly why. Of course, we don't actually know that facial recognition actually occurs in the fusiform gyrus, but that's what most people think. Most neuroscientists think it does. And then the idea is the facial recognition. I don't know if the term malfunction is the right term, but the less ability to recognize faces, is that a function of the fusiform gyrus, or is that something of that's part of the visual processing that goes into that. So there's still debate on there. But the interesting piece here is that the study exists that suggests that introverts may have more difficulty identifying faces or facial recognition. And of course, this is based on new faces. And so there's memory involved in this as well. And what they found out was that extroverts are particularly adept at recognizing faces of famous people, but also they were more adept at recognizing new faces, whereas introverts tended not to. Now, nobody knows why, but the theory that has come out around surrounding this is that because extroverts are more people oriented, they enjoy going out, that their fusiforms are more activated by new faces because it energizes them. And as we talked about before, one of the main differences between introverts and extroverts is this idea of energy. So extroverts tend to get energy from being around other people, whereas introverts tend to lose energy. So the idea here is that because introverts don't spend as much time around people, they have a lower functioning area in that arena of facial recognition. Whereas extroverts, because they are actively going out and meeting other people, they have a more uh, developed sense. And this kind of makes sense on like a muscle. If the more you use a muscle, the more developed it gets. So this kind of makes sense on this. But of course, nobody really knows quite yet if this is true, uh, and if it is true, why it's true. But we do know that stress and anxiety does affect not only memory but facial recognition and things like that. So, but I think that was pretty fascinating, and I hope you did too. And I think I can maybe understand that from a little bit, because you may not think so, but I'm an introvert. And I think I've said that before. I call myself a terminal introvert quite often, because I can spend a lot of time by myself and be pretty okay with that. You get me around people, which I don't mind being around people. I really enjoy being around people, but I do get very tired very quickly if I'm around people for too long. And back in the early 2000s, when I was going to school, I discovered faces. I discovered research done on faces by Paul Ekman and uh, some other folks like Friesen. I can't remember his first name, but I was captivated by that. I am captivated by faces, and I was really just delved into the whole gamut of studies around faces. I'm talking about expressions and muscles and movements and micro expressions and blended expressions and all these other things, because it just never occurred to me prior to this discovery that faces were so fascinating. And that's one of the interesting things about human behavior, is that we sort of go through life, and we take things as it comes, and we just sort of take things for granted until something happens that shows us something different about what we are looking at, and then suddenly it changes the entire landscape of everything that we have been thinking or doing surrounding this thing. So, when I'm talking to people, and I'm talking a little bit about the heuristic functions of the brain, and I talk about people looking outside their window and they just see trees. It's interesting when you start pointing out individual pieces, and when you go out and you look at these things and you start seeing textures and colors, and really remind yourself that there is such a variety of things out there to really engage yourself with. It just opens up a whole palette of colors and textures and meanings, and it's a fascinating thing when that happens to people. I've seen it happen to people. I've experienced it myself, and it's an incredible feeling, both experiencing and watching it happen. So uh, I think I just went off on a tangent. Sorry about that. I was trying to just explain how the how I discovered faces and how it affected me, and now, and sorry. So you just saw how that completely fascinates me and what it does. But anyway, that would be an interesting thing if that's true. If that's true, like I said, the study suggested that extroverts are better at facial recognition than introverts, and so it suggested that introverts have a more difficult time recognizing faces. I think that's a very fascinating thing. I don't know how you feel about that, or if you even think about that. So there you go. That's my deal about introversion, anxiety, facial recognition, and brain stuff. So enjoy that. We'll be right back with the question of the day. And we're back. And today's question, I'm kind of surprised that I haven't gotten this question. So it's taken a while to get around to this question, because I know I've talked about, I used to work in a sleep lab, so I got to watch the brain activity of people sleeping, and you could tell when they were going into REM sleep. And and that's one of those interesting things about the human mind, is why do we dream? And the thing about it is that we don't know. We still don't really know why people dream. We have theories about it. Freud's theory was that the dream was a window into the unconscious, so that we could really start decoding that. And there's a lot of this dream interpretation stuff that sprouts out of Freud's theories. There's also a lot of dream interpretation through more spiritual ideas and things. So there's theories that range that it's communication to God, it's communication to other beings, whatever. It's from the psychological aspect, it's peering into the psyche, into the unconscious. From a more practical standpoint, the I guess you could say the more modern theories are based around the idea that we dream every night in order to process the images and things that we've seen throughout the day. And we know that well, at least it seems to be that dreams actually help us process our memories. We still don't understand how it works, or why it works the way it does, and why it really is this sort of hallucinatory experience when we can remember our dreams. We don't often remember our dreams. Usually when we remember our dreams, we're in a state of arousal, so that we actually have a coming awake period of time during that REM period. And REM sleep is actually very close to being awake anyway, so it's very easy to see how that happens. But that seems to be the most functional idea of, or theory of, why we dream, is that we're actually processing memory, and it's our brain's way of doing it. We also know that dreaming is important for certain other aspects, like anxiety. People who've lost the ability to dream due to damage to the particular area of the brain that's responsible for REM sleep, or where we think REM sleep comes from, they experience a lot of anxiety. I think there's some other things like weight gain, and I can't remember. There's several different things that happen when you don't dream, or don't dream often, or something is keeping you from dreaming. So you often hear that you have to get certain amount of hours of rest per sleep, or per night, and that's true. And one of the reasons why that is that we go through these cycles of REM and non-REM sleep throughout the night. So regardless, that's just one of the frontiers that people are still trying to figure out. And that's the best I can do for that question is that there are several different ideas about what a dream is. And the most basic theory is that we're really just processing things that we've picked up unconsciously or consciously throughout the day. And our brain is sifting through that information and figuring out where to process those memories and how to keep them and where to put them. So there you go. We dream, we don't really understand it, and it's really a cool thing to think about. So that's all I have for this week. I hope you enjoyed our time together. Always want to hear what you have to say. If you have questions, please send them to me at mike@whatdrivesyou.net. If you have comments or, if you want to ask questions about any of the other topics we've covered today or in past episodes, drop me a line. I really like to discuss this stuff, as you can maybe tell just by the fact that I'm speaking to you over this medium. So enjoy your week. Enjoy these things. If you're as fascinated by this stuff as I am, if you want to learn more about facial features or faces, look up the works of Paul Ekman. He's probably the most famous person that studies faces. Great TV show is Lie to Me. If you want to watch something, a dramatization about that's one of my favorite shows. But there it is. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.